Power up. Welcome to Energypreneurs, where I bring to you the exciting new opportunities in solar power, battery, and electric cars. I'm your host, Sohel Hasni. I have been tracking and analyzing these technologies on LinkedIn and Twitter for more than 10 years. Now we meet on podcast. So, how have you been?
Yeah, good. It's getting springtime in Sydney, so it's always beautiful at this time of the year.
Yeah, and the weather is getting better also. COVID getting better.
That's true. We had like 5 days without a single case of community transmission in Sydney.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, my wife have been very stressed lately, so I hope. Can you explain Everty, right? You are getting into the electric vehicle space with a different twist. You're not going there with a car. What is Everty?
Yeah, that's right. So Everty is actually a software company. And what we do is we provide a software for electric vehicle charging station operators so that they can monitor and manage and monetize their charging stations. That includes taking payments from EV drivers, but also to understanding how the asset is performing and doing remote diagnostics and troubleshooting.
Wow. So this will be, of course, these are all cloud-based and things like that, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like when you look at charging stations, they're like a computer. If you don't have software to make it smart or an operating system to use them, they're not that helpful. A computer only helps you because you're creating value through PowerPoint presentations or Word.
Yeah. Okay. That's a nice way of explaining. So you are making the charging infrastructure to be able to talk to their clients, which is their electric vehicles, and talk to themselves in terms of optimizing and for the also for the resource owner, so that all the chargers gets used properly and optimized use, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we have a driver-facing application for them to use it when they come to a public charging station, but also a operator's dashboard to have all the analytics and reports that they need from their tools.
So how did you get into this industry?
Well, it's really funny. I was working in renewable energy, and at the time, I was actually working for Enphase Energy, who produce microinverters and battery storage and smart software for home energy management. And I looked at Australia having the highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world per capita. And we had hardly any EVs. And it doesn't make sense. If you already have solar on your roof, put an EV in your garage and you can charge it for free from solar and you can reduce your emissions even further. So I was really puzzled that in 2016, there were hardly any EVs. One of the reasons was, though, I have to admit, is that at the time you could only buy Teslas and BMWs, so maybe not a car for everyone. But yeah, so that was definitely a barrier, but also the availability of charging infrastructure. And that's why I started Everty to solve the problem of having charging infrastructure available in public and private spaces.
So both public and private spaces.
Yeah, so we work with councils and companies like shopping centers, anywhere where people can freely access charging stations. But we also work a lot with workplaces that are looking to put their first fleets in or transition their fleet to electric cars. They have to retrofit their own car parks with charging stations so that they can fill up their cars.
Okay, so you are in a way building up that invisible infrastructure that I've been talking about. So if everyone is connected through your software, meaning all charging infrastructure and all cars, you can start distributing electricity from point A to B using the electric cars as a distribution line, if you like. No?
Yes, certainly. I mean, at this stage, we would basically look at managing the demand, but we're very much focused on vehicle to grid technology. In Australia, at this stage, there are no capable chargers and very few cars out there. It's only the Nissan Leaf who allows V2G. But there's first trials starting in Australia. And as the technology matures, we will definitely look at increasing or implementing that into our portfolio.
Okay, so this will also help the companies to better understand. Like I hear a lot of questions that from a country level that we have a vision to do that many buses, that many cars. How many charging stations do we need? Where should the location be? I mean, that's what your software will be able to ultimately tell everyone, no? For a country
Yes,
specific.
yeah, absolutely. So for one, the best thing about the software is that you know understand the utilization of existing charging stations, and you can then effectively plan further charging stations or new locations. So we have actually calculated that per every electric car sold, there's probably 1.7 EV chargers going into the market. And that's because they often the car comes with a home charger. So there's already one going into a home. But then, as I said, there's all these public locations, workplaces that get chargers. So as we're heading towards, like, I don't know, 2 million cars in Australia by 2030, the least, we could potentially see over 3 million charging stations being installed in various places.
Yeah, I mean, these charging stations are not a huge, no?
No, so definitely not for the home. Most people have a 7 kilowatt AC charging station. Some have cars that can charge a bit faster, but for that you need like 3-phase and not single phase. So most people have a 7 kilowatt charger at home. And then for workplaces, you're looking at around 22 kilowatt AC or 25 kilowatt DC, depending on what cars you have in your fleet. And then only for the public charging stations along highways and in metropolitan areas would you have like the faster ones, 50 to 350 kilowatts, similar to the Tesla supercharging network. But most charging actually happens at home and at work, where cars are parked for very long hours. And there you don't need super fast charging.
Okay, and what's the typical cost of a home charger if somebody loses one, have to buy a spare one or something? You said one comes with the car for free.
Yeah, so they start at around $1,700.
Mhm.
And that they are the ones that are already fitted with an inbuilt modem so that you can connect it to the internet to really make it smart and communicate with the EV universe.
But for a very simple base charger, the cost would be much, much less because it's just a step down transformer at the end of a cable, no?
Yes, absolutely. There are cheaper ones. They're not the smart and connected ones. And for many homeowners, that will be probably enough to just fill up their car. Having said that, with a smart one, you can, for example, improve your solar self-consumption if you have solar, or if later on, if you want to be a part of demand management or vehicle to grid, then you can't do that with what we call a dumb charger that's not connected to the internet.
So, what proportion of chargers that are installed in the market are dumb chargers as opposed to smart chargers?
That's a very good question because no one knows where these dumb chargers sit because they're not making themselves known. And there's also no register. You can install a charger in a hotel or in a home and you don't have to tell anybody. So in Australia, we only have official figures for publicly accessible charging
Mhm.
stations. But then, yeah, the amount of private charging stations that are not publicly accessible is probably quite high. So we say there's probably for every, or public charging makes probably 30% of all charging in Australia. And so
And
I
those
think
are and those are all smart chargers.
yes, most of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the chargers are also good in a way that you can move them around quite easily. No, they are really not stuck in one place.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on what sort of installation you have. When
Mhm.
you look at the bigger fast chargers, they all come with power control units and they're quite specific grid connections. So you wouldn't just take it out and put it somewhere else. So it's quite costly to build these fast charging stations. But if you have let's say, a home or work charger that's just fitted to a wall, in theory, you can just like unwire it, unscrew it, and put it in another location.
Because the question that I get asked a lot, and like these chargers, as you mentioned, 7 kilowatt charger at home, which is a couple of decent sized air conditioners in a way. People don't worry if other people are installing air conditioners. Suddenly, a lot of people worry about the uh, aggregated demand of these chargers into the system, do you talk to the local distribution company at all if there is an issue of installing charging, or they're just tiny sort of devices that really doesn't impact much to the grid, no, to the distribution?
Yeah, that's very interesting. We're participating in a lot of consultations
Mhm.
with the energy market and governments. At this stage, with only 15,000 cars in Australia, there certainly isn't a big problem just yet. But when you look at having more and more cars, the Australian National University estimated that if you have 1 million cars, and we have 20 million cars in Australia, if you have 1 million EVs, that would make up 25% of the energy demand of all
Mhm.
of Australia. So a quarter just going into cars as a new appliance which are distributed around the country in various spaces, and you can't control when they demand the 25%. That is certainly something where you start paying attention and you want to do some forward planning.
Yeah, I mean, the opposite might be true as well. I mean, you have then that many electricity service provider walking around. They not only will impact the demand, I think they will impact the supply side even more, because every car, as you said, there will be a solar power station backed up. So car is just carrying the juice around whoever needs, from vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting challenge with electric vehicles is that you don't know exactly where they're going to be. If you have a home battery or you have your aircon, you know it's there, it's installed, it's registered, and it's not moving. But with a car, you may fill up at work over during the day, and then you put it back into the home or the grid at night. So, but no one really knows where that employee's car, like where they're going or where they might be doing that. So it's definitely going to be a very nice challenge to solve for the energy market.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I talked to another guest hang in, and we discussed this point that with all the cars moving around, the perfect place will be to someone to set up a electricity swapping station. So you have excess that you have charged at home, you just drop it in, and then someone else picks it up. These batteries act as a kilowatt hour reservoir in the middle of nowhere, because you don't need to have charging behind it, because electricity generation can come from the cars and get dropped on. It's just a market, right? Because
Oh,
if you
absolutely. And we're seeing so many like different business models and ways to do that coming up. For example, NEO, they have suggested battery swapping.
Mhm.
I think NEO as well, plus Renault, they actually said, oh, we're only leasing the batteries to the owner of the car, but they're still our asset. Then you have others who are looking at charging from car to car, passing on the electricity. And then, of course, in the future, you'll have wireless charging. It's already working and ready. It's just waiting for a broad rollout. So with all these different ways of distributing energy, it'll be very interesting to see how we manage that from a business point of view, I guess. Because in the end, it has to be easy for the user, and it has to have like a financial benefit or some other benefit. We're not doing anything without any motivation, and so it'll be good to see how, for example, the energy retailer are looking at this, or companies like ours may become a player in the exchange of electricity.
Yeah, yeah, it would be fun too. Now, just tell me this $1 million question: or Australians are early adopters? McDonald's experiment with their product in Australia before they introduce anywhere else, right? McCafe, we had it in Australia, I think late 90s. Then after 5 years of trying, it went to the rest of the world. Why is not Australians taking up electric cars?
That is a absolutely perfect and valid question, and it's so hard to say because, as you said, normally Australians are always early adopters. Like when the smartphone came out, we bought them in droves. Like it's really interesting. I think Australians often have this idea that the first generation of EVs, they had a very limited range. They had a range of 150 kilometers. And Australia being such a large country, we always think, oh, our vast distances, an electric car will not do, will not work for us. But coming back to the basics of daily life, most people live in cities and they don't commute more than 40 kilometers per day. So even the first generation of cars was viable. But now that we're seeing EVs with 400, 500 kilometers range, that whole range anxiety is no longer an argument. And I think with bigger batteries and longer range, we'll see more uptake.
So you see that now that the initial period is gone, maybe now the EVs will take up very quickly.
Yeah, it's obviously everyone knows about Tesla, but since the Model 3, the cheaper version was introduced to the Australian market, Australian EV sales has really boomed. Like we've tripled our EV sales in the last year on the back of the introduction of the Model 3, but also the Hyundai Ioniq and Kona and the new Nissan Leaf. So we now have more affordable EVs available in Australia, and that's caused tripling our sales figures.
Yeah. Now with the Australian dollars again strengthening, so EVs will be cheaper to import as well. I guess that will help. Is the government this? I just saw in the news that 1.3 billion or something government throwing in for new infrastructure. Even I think a lot will go in Victoria. Is anyone working on a large startup for electric vehicle, or are you going to go on a scale up because of all the government incentive? Plus, I think people want to do more on the environment side now through this lockdown. I think a lot of pennies have dropped.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of different companies emerging in the Australian market. There are companies that look at supplying hardware and installation services. There are companies that build actual EVs. We're looking at transitioning bus fleets. So there's now a couple of bus companies building buses locally. So there's a broad variety. And of course, Australia's success story, Tritium, the biggest fast charger manufacturer in the world. There are very, very good ways for Australians to seize this opportunity that we have. We will electrify transport, that's no question. And what we really do need is the policy support from the government. It's great to see investment, but what we also need to see is a lot of certainty, and that is targets and policies like emission standards, because the auto manufacturers, they can only produce a certain amount of cars. So let's say Tesla can build 500,000 Teslas a year. They give them to the countries that want them, that are very aggressive, that have high uptake, because that's the easiest way for them to do it. So we really need to encourage the original automotive manufacturers to bring the cars here through clever incentives and policies and infrastructure being available.
Yeah, so there is a bit of chicken and egg, right? If people are willing, cars will come, charging infrastructure will come, that will bring more people coming in. So if post-COVID, suddenly there is a very high demand of electric cars, because there will be, Australia looks like will be a COVID-free country. That's what I hope. I want to go back home. So then, and with the strong Australian dollars, maybe it will be a focused market for EVs, no?
Yes, that could absolutely happen. I think I saw figures that already car sales for private cars and used cars has increased on the back of the pandemic, because people now want to drive to work rather than taking public transport. So if people did that in an electric car, that would obviously be much better for the planet and for the people, because when you go into a city center with busy roads, electric cars are just quiet and it's smooth. It's a very different experience and makes our cities so much more livable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But there is also another risk, right? Whole world is going towards at least that by 2030 there will be no more internal combustion engine cars, right? A lot of European countries have made that mandate, and if Australia does, I hope, then you are buying a brand new car today, which could be an stranded assets, unable to sell it in 9 years' time. Who wants to take that risk? No?
You're absolutely right. I know a lot of people who say, I will never, ever buy a petrol car again. Their next car will be electric. And I think this is coming back to Australia needing to be very sensible that we actually have these cars available to our market, because we might end up being the dumping ground for dirty cars. If we're not encouraging EV uptake and people now buy cars that have lower emission standards than they have like in Europe or in the US, like that is really not a great idea for our local car market.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I never appreciated Australia could become a dumping ground of new petrol car that cannot be sold elsewhere,
Yeah.
especially in Europe. Interesting. So, is there a EV awareness community lobby group within the government? I mean, I know you are part of it, or you are part of an association. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there's the Electric Vehicle Council, which is our official industry association representing the EV market and EV industry. And we have a variety of different members. Our members come from charging station manufacturers, car manufacturers, energy retailers, suppliers into the EV market. And so together we're really working with the government and with public campaigns to make sure that we are ready and we're not being further left behind. And I guess especially now that all the countries are looking at how do we recover from COVID and how do we get our economy going again. You see a lot of proposals, especially in Europe, but also in the US, to have a green recovery or a renewables-led recovery. And EVs play a very important role in that.
Okay, that's fantastic, because EV can bring in one thing, which is free transportation, right? Right now, I mean, I used to drive, my house in Doncaster East, I used to drive to Melbourne CBD every morning. So that's exactly, as you said, 46-kilometer round trip. Now that will cost $2-3, 2-3 kilowatt hour, sorry, $2-3 in a car, maybe even more, up to $5, depending on, sorry, I'm just lost here. Yeah, quite 4 liters, so about $4-5. Now, if I went to electric on a Nissan Leaf, that will cost 10 kilowatt hour, so half. And then 10 kilowatt hour is nothing if you have a 5 kilowatt hour rooftop solar, which many of the Australian houses have. So suddenly you have taken one budget item out of your everyday expenses is buying of gasoline. So that must be tremendously encouraging and lucrative, I would say.
Yes,
no?
absolutely. The thing is, we often, like when we say, oh, electric vehicles are so expensive because they're these like large luxury SUV types, we do forget that EVs have hardly any maintenance costs and that the recharging, refueling an EV is so much cheaper. So over the lifetime or a couple of years, even for like a 4-year fleet car, EVs make the perfect solution because they are cheaper to operate. They also retain their resale value. So if you have a fleet car and you sell it after 4 years, you get a lot more for your EV than you get for a petrol car that you're selling as a used car into the market. So there's so many advantages of having EVs. And as you said, it could potentially be free once we have autonomous cars. Think about that you don't need a driver if you just want to order a car because they're autonomous. They're hardly paying anything for the electricity that goes into them. And if they're then also V2G equipped, they can actually sell electricity back to the grid and potentially operate without charge or not without fees. I mean.
Yeah, I prefer the V2V than V2G because I think it could be that someone coming for dinner rather than bring a bottle of wine is saying, okay, can you bring me 20 kilowatt hour charging? We are low this week or on our solar. So, and it can go from one car to another, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, people do that already. So when EV owners visit each other, they always plug in at each other's home, but I guess this at this stage it's still like, oh yeah, okay, you bring a bottle of wine, don't pay me for the electricity. But once that could be done from vehicle to vehicle and it's all automated and there's no human transaction needed, then of course you can just distribute electricity and money and data in a way that is very favorable.
Yeah, it's no different from you grown some organic lettuce in your backyard. Someone comes in and said, "Hey, I've got too much produce. Take it." Not necessarily people will charge. So that will come in. Definitely, it started already in many parts. Okay, so looks like Australia being a early adopter country, being a high Aussie dollars, maybe we'll take a huge surge in electric vehicle, we all hope. So how about the built up environment? Are we ready for that transition, broadly speaking?
Yes, that's a very good point because most of our buildings were built a couple of decades ago and no one had EVs on their mind back then.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at especially our city centers where we have these large office towers, they often have car parks with like 2, 3, 500 car parks underneath these office towers. And you couldn't just easily put in, I don't know, 100 or 200 charging stations and then expect that all users can charge at once, because you would, first of all, probably have a constraint in the electricity supply from the building, like the whole wiring to do that. But then you also have to probably increase your grid connection, which all adds cost to retrofitting. So the best solution, and there will be a lot of retrofits because they're needed, but the best solution is to go in early, and it comes back to policy and legislation. In the ACT and also in New South Wales, we're already looking at changing the building codes to have new buildings to be EV ready. That means they just need to be wired enough, and in their planning phase, you need to consider what that means in terms of future energy loads. You don't have to install the charger just yet, but you have to make sure that the basics are there so that at a later time you can easily fit in a charger for your customers.
Okay. And then as the grid loses its need, if you like, in the suburban areas where more and more people are using solar, grid was using or right now being used as a battery. So that can eventually also move because more and more people are putting batteries in their houses with the government subsidies. So grid can see trading of EV charges as a new business as well, no?
Yes, absolutely. Like for the grid, EVs are an opportunity to actually smooth out the peaks that we have. And but also considering when you have like solar that is generated during the day, so EVs can actually soak up all that solar energy being produced. However, at this stage, a lot of people charge at night when solar isn't produced. So there you would want to probably incentivize people to charge during the day when solar and wind production is really high. Or you have like a third stationary battery that sits in between the EV and the solar. So there's very, very different ways to do this. And the grid will definitely benefit from EVs because there's such a distributed energy resource and they can help when it's needed. We just need to make sure that we plan accordingly and we understand the demand from EVs, especially where you have in the CBDs where there's not a lot of space and you want to have a lot of EVs in a small amount of space.
Yes, but if a significant number of cars are going to be autonomous, and then the number of car parked at the CBD under the building might vanish because the cars can go and park somewhere else or go and pick up some other passengers because currently on an average a car gets used less than a couple of hours a day, right? So it can run around and improve its capacity factor. In those cases, maybe that many chargers may not be needed in the city, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess with autonomous cars, we'll see a complete change of how we use cars, because as you said, normally a car sits probably like 90% or 95% idle. with autonomous cars, you wouldn't want that. You want them to be on the road all the time, driving people around and earning money. And so you would then charge them when there's less demand for transportation with autonomous cars. So that again may also hint to these cars being charged at night, not during the day, and they can go into other places to charge. But as you said, they can also feed back into the grid. There's so many ways where I guess how we as users, how we as people want them to work, like that should always come first. I have a lot of discussions with people in the energy market, and they say, yeah, the energy market needs to tell the EV industry what the grid can do for EVs or how EVs should behave. I'm completely the opposite. I say it's a car, it's a person using a car, and my personal comfort and me getting from A to B at a certain time comes first. And the grid has to serve the EV industry and not the other way around.
Absolutely. I think transmission companies and distribution companies, and I used to work for a power company, they are large monopolies. They get a lot of privileges with a single thread that we need to keep the lights on and no one wants their lights off. So I think that has changed over the years because of solar, because of batteries. So I think the penny will drop for them soon that, as you correctly said, EV is an opportunity, not a liability that you have to accommodate in your grid. So that mindset is going to change. I can see that's happening in many countries that I work in. So Australia
Yeah,
cannot be
absolutely.
an
And
exception.
we're seeing a lot of research and trials and pilot programs already going into that, whether that is vehicle to grid charging, demand management and orchestration. So yeah, we're all certainly getting ready, and now we just need the influx of millions of EVs.
Okay, so what keeps you awake at night on electric vehicle front?
Yeah, look, to be honest, we had a very funny week in Australia this week and last week. The government announced their technology roadmap, and it was pretty much focused on hydrogen and carbon capture and storage and gas. And they classified EVs as an emerging solution that needs to be watched. And I just found it really funny because when you look at Europe or the US or China, they're already established. We're here, we're ready to go. There's no, oh, let's see if this technology will prevail. We're just very late to the party. So yeah, the way that Australians sometimes look at technology and especially at our industry does keep me up at night every now and then. I do sleep quite well though.
Now, I mean, the point you made is very relevant. Okay, hydrogen, Australia has a lot of interest to the LPG infrastructure there. If those could be replaced with clean hydrogen made from solar, yes, there is potentially a market and others. But arguing that we have to do CCS, that's so ridiculous. I visited in Otway, very close to 12 Apostles, that they have carbon capture, not capture, just a storage under the ground. This is a pilot project. When I stood there and you looked around and you feel that, is that our future? Your gut tells no, it is not, because it's a rubbish dumping technology. You're dumping, it's no different from just putting your plastics in a landfill that it will come up one day. So that technology, and it is quite expensive. I know that Australian government has thrown in a lot of money to promote CCS. It has not happened. Then some smart people started calling it CCUS. I don't know where are going to use. I mean, fizzy drinks are fizzing away anyway. So yeah, this is interesting political stand on this. But I think electric vehicle will move very fast, as you correctly said, because of market pool. Because CCS
Yeah,
and those things has to be sort of top down.
exactly. Because we're no longer producing cars in Australia, or at least like the old petrol cars, we are now producing EVs here. But we are an import nation for cars. So we really, if we want to drive a European car in 5 to 10 years time from now, that will be electric, because that's where it's going to. I think in Australia, we expect price parity for EVs and internal combustion engine cars to take place in 2025. So if in 2025 you ask me to buy a car and I can get the same car electric or petrol, and the electric car is cheaper to maintain and to operate and faster and more fun to drive, why would I buy the petrol car if there's already price parity in the upfront purchase price? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, I'll give petrol cars another 5 to 10 years and then we'll get rid of them altogether.
Yeah, you just gave me an idea. You mentioned earlier, typically a car, someone does only 40 kilometer a day, right? That's your everyday commute. So even if it's a 50 kilowatt hour and a 20 cents US is the electricity tariff. So that's about $10, right? A day. And then that's about $3,000. So if someone is selling a car packaging in saying, well, this is just a lease to own car, I'll put solar on your rooftop. So you don't have to pay anything as in operational cost for next 5 years. You just pay on a monthly basis, like a subscription, whatever the amount become. Suddenly people will not be buying gasoline cars at all.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is when I speak to people who consider driving or buying an EV, I say, oh, but then how does it work with the charging? Because they're so used to going to a petrol station, which is smelly. It's not a nice place to be in. They're going to a petrol station, they hold the Bowser for like 5 to 10 minutes or however long it takes to fill up their tank. And then they drive away and they say, EV charging isn't fast enough. It can't do that. I always say to them, it doesn't need to do it, because when I come home, it takes me 10 seconds to plug the car in and then everything is done. I don't need to wait by the car to charge. Like the car can charge and I can do other things. So we really need to get into this like mind shift or shift our mindset about EVs and how we refuel them, and that plugging something into a power point or an EV charging station is by no means complicated or more unpleasant than having a petrol car.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the induction charging, so then you don't have to even do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be really interesting. I guess with induction charging, what we're looking at or following with very much interest is the dynamic induction charging, where you build it into the road and vehicles can take the electricity while they drive. Because I think that will be really important for public transport infrastructure. If our buses could just like on their normal way charge from the road without needing to stop or needing to do anything else, that would obviously be perfect to increase their hours of operations.
Okay. How does the future look like? Say 2030, you get up this time. It's not very far away. People say 10 years, but 10 years, 1990, 2000, 2010. 2010 is not far away, right? In the past. So how do you visualize a day in 2030 with electric car?
So I believe that in 2030, we will have less cars than we do now, because there will be more sharing, more autonomous cars, and smarter ways to go to places. Also, I guess COVID has demonstrated that potentially we are not using offices that much and we're not commuting that much anymore in the future if we keep working from home, or at least for part of our working hours. And then what I really love about the future with EVs is the quietness of them. Like when you're in Sydney and let's say you're at Broadway and it's 4 lanes in each direction and there's trucks and buses and cars. It is so noisy that you can't even have a normal conversation if you walk along the street. If all of this is electrified, it will be much quieter. Yes, you still have some noises from obviously the tires and the wind, but it'll just make our cities so much more livable. And especially when you go into a car park, you would know when sometimes you in a shopping center, you get out of the car and it is just not pleasant. It's smelly, it's warm, it's gray, it's not a good place to be in. EVs will transform this completely.
Yeah, it's like when the Melbourne trams got suddenly upgraded, no? The new trams. So suddenly it was, wow, it is so quiet.
Yeah.
You can actually have a coffee and do a bit of work.
Yeah, and I recently drove from Sydney to Brisbane in an electric car, and I have to say it was a breeze. They are so easy to drive, and it's so much more relaxing driving an EV than it is with a petrol car. And there are even studies where they say that EV drivers are more relaxed and happier when they arrive at their destination. So as for me, even as an employer, I would want my staff to drive EVs so that they are happy and relaxed when they come to work and they're the most productive human being they can be.
So, I mean, I feel a lot of passion for electric vehicle. Where is that coming from? I mean, you mentioned that you were in renewable energy, then got in, but I think you have a little bit more of passion about this. Can you explain what motivates you on getting into EV? Is it just technology or something else?
Yeah, so initially I looked at this from the point of our changing climate, global warming, and that we do need to be smarter with our infrastructure, that we have to move to renewable energy, we need to electrify our transport to reduce emissions there. I also have a background of working in freight and logistics and global supply chains for a couple of years. And there's so much potential to take CO2 emissions out of supply chains and out of how we go about our daily business. And there was always like climate change and sustainability was my main driver. But then once you start driving EVs, the passion gets even better because they're so much more fun to drive. I was never really a big car person, but now I'm really happy when I can jump into my EV. I'm actually just going to do that in a few minutes after we finish up here. And then I'm going to see a customer and I reveal a new charging station at their site. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Oh, fantastic. So how large is Everty?
We're still a small team because we obviously, as a software company, you don't have a lot of overheads. We work with contractors for installations. And so, yeah, we're at the moment only 3 employees, still very early, but yeah, we're growing constantly.
Are you so you are developing a technology that will have lot of use and interest from other part of the world where people are not there yet. So you are lining up, partnering up with others.
Yeah, we're working very closely with the charging station manufacturers because they when they sell their product, they are being asked by their customers, okay, it's great that I have the charging station now, but how do I make money from it? And so then the charging station manufacturers recommend us as a software platform to help the customer to build their business model for EV charging. So we work with hardware partners, but we're also looking at uh, partnerships with like big property companies and fleet companies, everywhere where cars will be handled and parked and charged. And yeah, when you look at some of the big property companies, they have huge portfolios across Australia or the world, and they all need to get ready to make their buildings EV suitable.
Yeah, like I live in Manila with a large block of apartments, and they have a lot of expensive cars and others, and no electric cars yet. But the owner of the electric utility told me once that's okay, if I get an EV, they will put the charging infrastructure for me. But then when I talk to the management in general, they want to establish maybe few charging station right now, but not sure where to start. Who do I talk to? How do I optimize? How many do I need? So you can also provide those sort of as a consulting services globally. I know you must be
having a lot of
Yes,
things on your plate.
absolutely. Because you can't expect everybody to be an expert in EVs, and especially when you come from a property or facility management background, that's exactly what we do, and we always do that in a very customer-centric manner. So let's say a facility manager wants to provide charging stations to their tenants. The first questions you should ask is, what are the cars? What are their behaviors? How long are they there? Do they need faster charging, slower charging? So we really look at the holistic picture, because in the end, the EV driver needs to be happy with the charging station that they get. If they're not happy with their product, then that's not good for the industry. So yeah, we do a lot of consulting and analysis before we actually supply our services.
Okay, so fantastic. So yeah, if somebody comes in my way, I'll pass your details as well. They might be interested. Now, a lot of my listeners are also very young entrepreneurs that who wants to do something for electric vehicle. They want to do something for the renewable energy and climate change. Where can they start? What should they do? You have any vision or ideas and guidance for wannabe entrepreneurs in this field?
Yeah, I think there's two things that entrepreneurs definitely need. Number one, and you mentioned that earlier, is passion for something. Because if you can make your business or your job, your hobby, the thing that you love to do the most, then you probably have the highest chance of success. And then the other thing that they should be looking for is there a problem? A lot of entrepreneurs actually solve their own problems because they've identified a problem, no one has solved it, and they're fed up that there's no solution. And this is sort of how we started as well, because I wanted to own an EV, but there wasn't enough charging infrastructure for EVs. And at the time, I lived in an apartment with street parking. So it wouldn't make sense for me to get an EV if there wasn't more accessible public charging infrastructure. So I sought to solve my own problem with the business. And as you can see, the passion is definitely there, and it's fun every day.
So people can, if somebody wants to start something into the EV field, where should they start? Should they look at the car, or charging is still a very interesting area to look at, no?
Oh, there are many, many interesting areas. When we say, or when we speak about EVs, we always think about cars, and that's probably also because it's a product that I'm working with. But there's so much happening in electric buses, electric ferries. There'll be the new electric airplanes, the vertical takeoff and landing sort of hybrid between plane and a helicopter. There's so many different spaces. If you're looking at EVs or the market from an energy perspective, then one of a good idea would be to go to a startup accelerator that has capabilities in that field. So we 3 years ago participated in a program run by Energy Lab, which is a accelerator incubator for energy startups. But there's also tech startups, startup hubs, and different programs for different people. There's also a lot going on in the whole area of waste and waste to energy, which is probably also an interesting problem to solve. So yeah, I'll encourage anyone to just look at all the opportunities that are out there.
So this is the Energy Lab in partnership with the University of New South Wales, right?
They were in partnership with the University of Technology of Sydney, UTS.
Oh, yeah, UTS, yes, yes.
And that's where their offices are.
Yeah, I visited them once. Okay, so that's fantastic. Anything else that I have not asked you in this discussion? Any other area that you want to cover?
No, I think this was a fantastic discussion, and it's really now up to everyone in Australia to get onto the EV bandwagon, and to also tell our politicians that we want cleaner and smarter and cars. And as you said before, like, people are really now reconsidering whether they should ever buy a petrol car again.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, Carola. I think you have to go, right? Let's keep in touch, see how this transformation happens very soon.
Thank you so much for the interview. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Carola. Bye. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us this week. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to our show. Also, leave your comments and review if you enjoyed today's episode. Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at @shasni for updates. That's SHASNIE. Once again, this has been Energypreneurs, connecting you to the innovative opportunities in solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles. Stay tuned.